So we've had half an hour since the publication of this independent commission on the future of the water industry from Sir John Cunliffe. Fergal Sharkey has already said it's a huge disappointment. I think he said that in an article in the Metro before he'd seen the actual report at 6 o'clock. But he's saying Steve Reid should resign. It doesn't go far enough. Clearly, the government has ruled out nationalising the water industry. Instead, a new and more powerful regulator. What is your sense, just in this first half hour, of what they've done and whether it's going to work?
Well, it would cost billions of pounds to renationalise the water sector. And the thing about privatisation is that it has been a very mixed story. So the water sector was privatised in the first... Yeah, the water sector was privatised in the first place because otherwise it would be the taxpayer and the bill payer who would have to pay everything for improvement. Initially, there was investment in improvement.
Now what's going to happen now, though?
Well, one of the concerns that Sir John Cunliffe quite rightly draws attention to is that the water sector regulator, the body Ofwat, has not done the job as effectively as it should. And I know from my own time in government that we gave instructions to Ofwat to try to ensure that not only did the water companies invest more in cleaning up their act, but also that we looked at the structure and the ownership of some of these companies, because some of them were taken over by essentially private equity concerns, people whose principal interest was not making sure that there was an honest profit and that the service improved, but who were intent on cutting costs in order to maximise revenues and then cutting and running.
I know Michael's had enough of experts, but...
Nigel Farage, when asked about this, Kevin, said the thing to do is to let these companies go bust, let all the people in charge and all the investors go broke, and then start again. A lot of people will hear that and think, that sounds good. Yeah,
you also talked about getting private sector innovation in, and it's failed in water. Because as Fergal Sharkey...
Let's just address with that problem. What we've seen here is Fergal Sharkey... So there's going to be a single water regulator in England, one in Wales. There's going to be 8 new regional water systems in England and 1 national authority in Wales that will be responsible for developing water investment plans. They promise greater consumer protection. That's some of the measures so far. But all of those sound like things we've heard before, apart from the scrappy of Ofwat. So what is wrong? Just so that people understand... with letting them go bust.
It's privatisation itself in water, because you don't compete. You don't turn on one tap and get Thames water, then turn on another and get Northumbrian water. It's a monopoly. It's a local monopoly, which is why most countries in Europe have their water systems publicly owned, controlled and run. It's a structural problem. They've taken out billions.
So you think nationalisation is
public ownership is the way.
So we've got to move to nationalisation. Michael, Lord Gove, I should say.
Please,
I haven't seen you since you're Lord. I'm going to use it once at least. So, you know, as said, it will cost billions to renationalise. Why don't we just let the companies go bust and suffer? What will be the harm to us?
Well, you'd have to pick them up then, but you can't let them go bust in the sense you can't let taps run dry. You can't have people trying to flush their loos, their toilets, and nothing happens. You can't have people going in the shower and there's no water coming out. You run in a bath and there isn't any water in it. That's why you've got to keep the show on the road. That is the problem.
OK, that explains that.
Can I ask Michael a question, though? Because I understand the point you made, which Kevin's disagreeing with, that nationalisation isn't the answer. It would cost billions of pounds. And let's be honest, even a nationalised company could fail to do the investment, not meet the standards. You would still need regulation of water. The consumer could still be ripped off. But you were Environment Secretary for 2 years, 2017 to 2019. Back then, you talked about companies exploiting their natural monopoly, playing the system for the benefit of wealthy managers, excuse mongering. So this was like 8 years ago. You were saying all the things kind of Kevin is sort of saying about being ripped off, excuses. What is the reason why, for years, with successive politicians, including you, have failed to manage to sort this out? You were saying this 8 years ago, and it didn't change.
Yeah, I called out the water companies and I gave Ofwat...
But you were in charge.
Yeah, specific instructions about the importance of being tougher on them at the time, but that action wasn't taken.
By...
So what did you not have the power then to punish the lack of action? Is that the reason why it didn't change?
It is certainly the case that the powers that the government had at that time were limited, and to Steve Reid's credit, he's given himself, he's the Environment Secretary, new additional powers to punish the water companies.
So you couldn't tell the regulator what to do?
Within reason, we can tell the regulator certain things.
But you can't, if they don't do what you want, you couldn't punish them. Because that seems to be what Fergal Sharkey thinks is a problem, that everybody issues a diktat, but nobody actually has any teeth.
Well, there will be additional teeth as a result of what Steve Reid has done, but the fundamental issue here is that our water infrastructure is over 100 years old. And that what we need to do is to have a level of investment in it that companies haven't been willing to authorise and the government hasn't been willing to authorise. Now, north of the border in Scotland, the water industry is not privatised, and there are very similar problems.
But the whole argument for privatisation was that the government can't afford this investment, whereas if we bring in these private companies who can access global financial markets, they can raise the money and do the investment. So what was it about the private companies and the new privatisation regime which didn't do that investment over 30-plus years?
Some companies, at some points, did make that investment, and that's why I say it is a mixed picture.
Which companies?
Well, again, there are some of the original water companies immediately post-privatisation did attract exactly the sort of international investment that Ed is talking about and did improve the quality of water. The other thing also is that we now have, quite rightly, higher standards about what we expect. It was also the case that under the Conservatives, a guy called Richard Benyon, who was an environment minister, essentially ensured that we had a far clearer understanding of what was going on with our water system, so things like sewage overflows, and also the level of pollution in our rivers was more effectively monitored.
But it was also
it's not just the water companies who were responsible.
But it was also the case, Michael, in the first 5 years of the Conservative government, 2010 to 2015, a signal went out, including to the Environment Agency, that we want less regulation, we want it to be kind of softer. You see a big fall-off in the number of cases the Environmental Agency was taking on pollution, on sewage, against the water companies. It wasn't only about money. Wasn't there also a sort of a deregulatory culture which took hold in the government as well as in the water industry?
That's one of the reasons why, when I was Environment Secretary between 2017 and 2019, I insisted that we try a reset. Now, as I say, I was there for only 2 years. I didn't want to make too many excuses.
But it had gone wrong.
Undoubtedly the case that more action required to be taken. But for Kevin, one of the questions that he and those who argue for nationalisation have to answer is not just where will the money come from for any renationalisation, but also why is it the case that in Scotland, where they don't have a privatised water system, they have exactly the same problems with lack of investment, sewage overflow, and the sort of problems that Fergal Sharkey is understandably concerned about.
OK, Kevin, answer that one.
Wales too, actually, a different ownership model. But you've got to have the direction. You've got to have governments that want to do it. Now, look, I remember the privatisation of water in 1989. I sat in on the debates as a young reporter. They were sold off.
Day release from school.
They were sold off. They were sold off without any debt, great tracts of land, and what they focused on was making profits and dividends and fat cat salaries rather than the system.
But hang on, you can understand that to lure in, but then you need some kind of legal regulation to ensure that the investment happens. So that's what was lacking.
You're right. Even if it's particularly if it's publicly owned, you would still need that legal system. You still need those targets. But as Fergal Sharkey will tell better than I can, the amount that has been siphoned out by these companies, which are often internationally owned, they're not British owned.
I'm just going to ask the obvious questions. See, when you look at some of the details that we're getting through on this report, and some of the ambitions of the government, the Environment Secretary was talking about yesterday, he's talking about halving sewage pouring into our rivers, halving the number of leaks in there, and that's considered an ambition. We don't want half the number of leaks, we want no leaks. So why can't we get that money back from these companies? Is that just gone now? They've owned it? We're in a mess that we can't get out of?
It's spent. What they've done is they siphoned off the profits as bills went up rather than investing, and they went in dividends.
And that's lost.
To the shareholders.
Some people would say that's a crime.
That has gone.
That's fraud.
That has gone, and they mounted up debt. They were sold debt-free, and they now have enormous debts because they weren't investing the money that was coming in from bill payers. So much of that was going off in profits.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
It's probably Steve Reid, so he wants to keep his job.
The thing I would say to you, though, Kevin, is I just feel as though, you see, it's so easy to say, you know, big dividends, fat cat salaries, but actually, you know, if you go back to 1998, 99, Frank Dobson, when he was Environment Secretary, back then was saying it's all terrible, fat cat salaries. The truth is, government has the power through the regulator, because of setting prices, which the regulator does, mandating the investment profiles. Government, in the last 30 years, could have sorted this out. And government failed, Labour and Conservative. It wasn't simply fat cat bosses. That is so easy. Why did government fail to sort this out?
And then you want to publicly run it without publicly owning it, which then creates problems. And look, it's rather like the rail industry.
Quite a lot.
The rail industry. Look, the rail
industry was pretty bad before privatisation.
The private sector does many things really well and can change and produce good services. But there are some areas it doesn't. Water is a local monopoly. It doesn't. Rail was another one. You fragment the network, 100 bits it was privatised into. It didn't work.
Yeah, but the reason why it was privatised was partly because of decades of underinvestment when it was a national industry.
It was ideological, you know. There were ideological privatisations by the Conservatives.
I think you're letting us all off the hook. I think the question is, why did government fail, and what gives us confidence now that Steve Reid can actually sort this out? Why isn't this just one other moment of failure?
There's a broader issue as well with some of these privatisations, which is that there have always been people within government, particularly within the Treasury, though I don't want to beat up on any single department, who've argued that if you want to make sure that we continue to get investment from abroad in this country, then people need to see that they are getting a decent return. And if you say that we're immediately going to nationalise this or we're going to confiscate these assets without compensation, then other investors that are there to make sure that money goes into everything from British Steel to our railways to our defence industry will say Britain is no longer a safe place in which to invest. So that argument was made. My point was that, of course, we want investment from abroad, but some of the people who've been running our water companies, particularly these private equity firms, are not interested in investment for the long term. They're interested in essentially asset stripping.
Yeah. So I'm going to come back to a really obvious question, if I may.
Playing the system for the benefit of wealthy managers.
Yes.
You said they were playing the system for the benefit of wealthy managers in 2018, and you were a powerful Secretary of State. What stopped you? You had the power to sort this out. Why didn't you?
We gave a new mandate to Ofwat, but it wasn't enough.
Because you didn't have the teeth to get them to do it?
I think while I drew attention to the crisis, I think that I probably did not, at that time, spell out clearly enough the additional steps that the regulator would take and the additional legislation we'd need.
I think it's about consequences. I think that's been the problem. There are no consequences for the companies doing this.
There are now. And it was also the case that we tightened up regulation in a number of ways with a new environmental regulator alongside Ofwat. But one of the difficulties is that the private equity firms that behaved so badly in terms of water don't just restrict their activities there. They also operate in areas in everything from pub chains to ferries, and there's a broader problem with how we make sure that these companies operate in a way that is in the interests of consumers.
So going forward, whether it's complete government failure, as you were saying, on successive different parties, or whether it's sort of abuse, if you like, by the investors of stripping the assets out and not investing, do we just have to give up on all that? Because I think what people watching are thinking is we've got filthy waters, we've got massive bills, which are only going to go up in order to pay for whatever change needs to happen. Is there any form of redress for the fact that we have sewage in our rivers and seas now, and we don't have enough water, and we don't have enough reserves?
We've always had problems with pollution, and they have got worse as a result of the creaking infrastructure. But it's not just the water companies. I mean, they are the principal responsible actors, but it's also the case that the way that we farm and even things like the way in which we travel contribute to water pollution. So what is called runoff, essentially some of the pollution that comes from farming, goes into our rivers. That is an issue. And the other thing is that particles from the tyres of the cars that all of us drive also contribute to that as well. So, obviously, we should target the water companies, but we need to do other things as well.
But can we get any of that money back, Kevin? Is there any way of doing it? Can we change the laws? Can we do it? Because I know people are saying it's
claim
not...
it. No, I think it'll have gone to lots of individual shareholders. I think it's almost impossible. Would I like it to happen? Right. Yes, but I think it's almost impossible. But Comrade Michael, you failed. Now, you failed. On your own admission, you failed.
Well,
do you think your Labour successor, but several, will succeed?
Well, I think that Steve Reid has significant responsibilities here, and I think he fully appreciates that. At the last general election, the state of our rivers was the biggest environmental issue and one of the top 3 or 4 issues. Steve Reid knows that, and he knows that he has a lot riding on demonstrating that over the next few years he can make a change.
Resign because he's ducked the big issue, which is nationalisation. Fergal Sharkey is saying this can't be done. Do you think, with these reforms, I know we've not seen the detail yet, with taking the powers and that focus, is it possible to improve our water quality in the next few years?
I think it is significantly possible to improve our water quality. As I say, I mean, I'm obviously a Tory, but I have a high regard for Steve Reid. I think that he is a very capable guy who's taking this issue with the seriousness with which it deserves. And again, Fergal is a brilliant campaigner, but you can't just magic tens of billions out of the air. And also, when someone is trying to do the right thing, it's premature to call for their resignation. If Steve Reid or a Labour Environment Secretary in a year or in 2 years' time has not made improvements, that's the time to say, well, the individual's failed to deliver.
Fergal Sharkey campaigned for Labour hard at the general election. He must have gone around 40 or 50 constituencies campaigning on this issue, which, as Michael said, was one of the big issues. You had the cost of living, public services, migration, and you had a lot of other important issues, one of which was water. And the Liberal Democrats, in particularly in the South East, made a huge thing about it. He campaigned for Labour. That's why I think he feels entitled to call for Steve Reid's resignation, because he feels let down.
Do you agree?
No, I think just saying people should resign all the time is...
Do you think it's possible for these reforms to make the difference without nationalisation?
I'd be very... no, I don't. And I'd be very surprised if he hits his target of halving spillages, discharges, pollution by the next election. I'd be very, very surprised. I mean, we are where we are, but the problem... I'll come back. I think the system is broken. You've got to change the system, and this is tinkering. You need the fundamental change of it should be a public service, not something that is privatised.
Right, well, I'm sure we're going to carry on talking about this. Could we talk about something else which is worrying everybody? The doctor strike. So, front page of the Mail today, they're talking about how the BMA have a sort of war chest. They've got 1 million ready to fight long-term with the Health Secretary. There was discussion, wasn't there, last week about other options that might work rather than giving a pay rise to what we used to call junior doctors, and that would include writing off student loans. We haven't talked about whether that might work or not. The Express also talks about doctors threatening to quit the NHS unless they get the pay rise. So that is the dilemma, isn't it? That you want to keep doctors in their place, you want to keep them working. And I imagine this government thought they'd sorted it when they did the pay rise last year. Well,
they sorted it then, and it's come back. And of course, the BMA, the British Medical Association, which is both a professional body and a trade union, is going to talk tough ahead of Friday when the 5 days. I think it's Friday, isn't it?
It is Friday.
The five-day strike's due to take place in England. But that's not to say it'll automatically go ahead. I've got no privy to the negotiations. But a trade union will always talk hard because there'll be lots of chats going on in the background, discussions. It's not impossible it'll be halted, But Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, he's talking tough because he's digging in. The trade union is digging in and talking tough in the same way, and you just hope they come together, because I think if the BMA do go on strike, resident doctors, junior doctors, as we knew them, hospital doctors, really, I think the public are against them this time. When they were on strike in 2023, they had widespread public support. That's gone now, and I think that relationship between a doctor and the public is very important. It's more important than it is between, say, a rail worker or a train driver and a passenger, because it's so personal when you deal with people. If you're going to chuck away all that bedside respect and authority you have because you're going on strike, I think that's something doctors should think about before they start this action.
Steve Reid,
in 2023, of course, the argument was not sitting down. The government wasn't sitting down, and now the Labour government has. Do you think that will affect how we view the doctors going on strike?
I think it already has, and I think that Kevin is right. I think that patience has been exhausted. So whether or not the amount that resident doctors and others in the NHS received as a pay rise last year was too much, just right, not enough, everyone has to appreciate that the NHS and the Department of Health has been the big winner out of additional spending from this government, and those working in the NHS have received a pay rise already. That additional money is there for the patients. It's there to make sure that the NHS works better. And I think that there has been extensive reporting about the fact that some of those who've been leading the BMA are doing this for a political agenda. They're to the left of Labour, and they want, essentially, to use the understandable concerns of some resident doctors about historic low pay in order to chastise the government. I think that is wrong. I think that resident doctors, of course, work incredibly hard at that stage in their career, but later on, when they reach a position either as GPs or consultants, they're well paid. And critically, when we look at the whole of the NHS, the additional pennies and pounds, indeed billions of pounds, should be going to improve patient care.
But we know that in the first year of the Labour government, the large majority of the money which went into the health service went to the pay of existing workers. We were just talking about Steve Reid, a Labour Secretary of State for the Environment, who will be judged in the next 3 years on whether he can deliver on water quality. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, judged in the next 3 years on whether we feel and see the NHS improving. Is it going to work?
Well, it will be incredibly tough for him. It's already the case that waiting lists in some areas have come down, but the experience of so many people in the NHS at the moment is not what it should be, not what it has been in the past. But I do believe, again, that of the range of minds that you have in the Cabinet, Wes Streeting's is one of the sharpest, and it's also the case that he knows that his reputation depends on reform. It's also the case that he has a tiny parliamentary majority. He may well lose his seat at the next election. So for him, success depends on really driving reform, because either he shows that he's got the vision necessary to change the NHS, and whatever happens at the next election, he'll be remembered as a reformer, or that's it.
Very positive about... I think you're cautiously positive about Steve Reid's chances, cautiously positive about Wes Streeting's chances of improving things. If you were advising Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, and you were to say, target that Secretary of State in that policy area, because that is where I think they're going to fail in the next 3 years, who would you tell her to go for?
Rachel Reeves. And again, I say that without any animus towards Rachel Reeves. I say that purely because the fundamental problems at the heart of what Labour are doing at the moment relate to mistakes that she has made. The biggest black mark against Labour in the eyes of the electorate was the imposition of, or rather the withdrawal of the winter fuel payment. It has also been the case that she's moved from, at different times, being the big spender to the fiscal hawk. Overall, there isn't a story about the economy that she's been responsible for telling. And as a result of that, I would worry, if I was in her team, about what is going to happen at the forthcoming budget in the autumn, because having had to retreat on welfare, she is almost certainly going to have to raise taxes. That is something she pledged not to do last year.
So we're talking about doctors. One thing the Daily Star says is they're going to hand out match tickets to help cure depression. I'm assuming it kind of depends which team you support.
He's a QPR fan. He's suffering.
I know.
He only goes to the football.
This is mental torture.
He goes to the football to feed his habit.
Exactly. No, I was going to say it's a cure for euphoria or for irrational happiness and exuberance. Going to see QPR
I've got to say, Michael,
lose week in, week out.
I am loving your laugh. We have later on in the programme, live in the studio, we have Basil Brush coming into our studio.
My hero.
I think at the moment, you are demonstrating a better laugh than Basil ever managed.
No. Well, I model both my dress sense and my laugh on Basil Brush.
The only thing is, at the end of your comments, you don't, after the laugh, you then don't go boom, boom.
Well, we'll wait until 7 o'clock.
And then you will. And then you will. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.